What is up, guys? You are watching DJ Tech Spec, and today we're going to be learning how to set up Traktor Pro 2.5. Alright, let's get right into it. I've already set up Traktor Scratch Pro, so I'm going to go into the preferences and then into the setup wizard and act as though I haven't yet. Alright, so this is the screen, the welcome screen you're going to be prompted with when you start up Traktor. It's just telling you to plug in all of your peripherals, whether it be a sound card or a MIDI controller, anything else. So you're going to hit next once you've done all that. It's going to ask you, are you using an external controller? And that means, are you going to be using like Traktor Control S4, a MIDI controller, anything like that? In my case, I'm not. I'm actually just using a Traktor Audio 6, um, a Behringer DJX 900 mixer, and two turntables as a digital vinyl setup. So I'm going to select no. Um, Next, it prompts you with a choice of track deck setups. Um, yeah, you have anything from 2-track decks to remix decks to 4-track decks. There's a tremendous potential with deck layouts. You have tons of combinations. The remix decks are really awesome to use. But I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to select 2-track decks with a scratch ability. I'm going to click next, and basically this screen is just telling you what your settings are as of late before you finish and the settings are applied. So you can see that I have Traktor Scratch Pro 2. I'm not using a MIDI controller. I have an external mixer, 2-track decks setup, and the English keyboard layout. So I'm going to click finish. Those look to be alright. And it looks like everything worked, so we're going to proceed on to the audio setup. And it should have changed your audio settings according to your settings in the setup wizard. So you can see that it's already set up everything for me with the Traktor Audio 6. You can change latency settings here for better performance. I'm not going to change any of these right now. That's actually going to be in a later video for audio optimization. Moving on to the output routing, everything is set up right now so that the output is going to go out of the A channel on my audio 6, and the deck B is going to go out of the B channel, and then the main out of C and D, which is alright for right now. The input routing also is looking to be set up correctly. This just means where Traktor should be expecting input and what it should be recognized as. Alright, we're going to move on to the timecode setup, and basically if you're going to be using like a laptop sound card or like a built-in sound card, you're going to choose internal playback, but if you are using a digital vinyl system, you're going to select scratch control. Basically that means you're going to have things set up for digital vinyl and a time-coded vinyl. The next section is we're going to be looking at is loading. I'm going to change these right now, and then I'm going to tell you why after I do that. Alright, the first option that I checked was loading only into stop deck. This is really, really important, especially for new DJs. Basically what this means is you're not going to be able to load a track into a deck that's already playing. So if you're ever in a live environment and you're performing and you accidentally try to load a track into one that's playing, the deck that's already playing, it's not going to let you do that. Otherwise, you'd get the dropout of audio, no sound, and the crowd's probably not going to be happy about that. The next box I have unchecked is stop playback at the end of the track, and I don't want that to happen because if you're ever in a sticky situation where a track's going to be ending, you can always jump back 16 bars or whatever measure of time and keep that audio playing. So you want to You want to keep the deck moving and make sure that it's always going to have the ability to immediately play. The next box is to duplicate a deck when loading the same track. I do that mainly for beat juggling and scratching. Uh, I, my right hand is my dominant hand, and it's going to be doing all the crossfader work. So if I want to do something really crossfader intensive and scratching intensive, I want to be able to use my dominant hand. So basically, this enables you to load into a non-dominant side, and then load another track while it's playing the same one into the other deck, and it's going to play at the exact same time the other one is. So you can just flip the crossfader back to the right position, and then load a scratch sample on the left, and be able to scratch immediately. So that's really useful if you have non-dominant, dominant hand issues. The next check is going to be initially queued to the load marker. Basically what that means is you're going to be loading to the first beat or where the load marker is, and you can set that yourself. This is really useful if you really want to get a track playing like quickly. In the resetting control section, I don't have anything unchecked, checked, because I like to keep everything the way it was on the last track so that I know what I'm going to be getting into when I start the other track. So if you want to keep the highs coming out more than the lows, you don't want the settings to reset. And this isn't a problem for me because I use an external mixer, so internally it's not going to do anything anyway. So moving on to the transport section, this is where you can adjust the tempo range and uh, the key lock, sync mode, etc., etc., etc. I like to set the key lock on eco because I don't have the fastest computer on earth. But if you did have a fast computer, I would suggest setting it to a more high quality setting. Moving on to the decks layout, you can choose what kind of deck you want A, B, C, or D to be. So let's change deck A to a remix deck just to see what that looks like, and it looks exactly like a remix deck. So you could have a 4 deck layout all made of remix decks, or you could have one deck a remix deck and one deck a scratch deck, or two scratch decks and two remix decks. It's all up to you. You can all change it from the preferences. Moving on to the tempo fader. If you check one of these, it's going to give you a tempo fader on whatever deck you check. So you can do that if you like one. Um, the platter and scope is going to be this platter right here. That gives you the ability to calibrate your time-coded vinyl and watch as a tick mark may go around your vinyl. I like to keep that minimized so I can get an optimal view of the wavetable. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings in Dex layout, I like to keep my check marks at dim. We'll load a load a track up here, so just so you can see that. Um, the tick marks are going to be these little things right here. If you zoom in right before the beat, and it just gives you an eye on where the next beat will be or is, and you can get a better eye on how well the beat grid is on a certain track. This one looks to be pretty good, but you can change it to full, which is going to give you a brighter, a clearer view of the tick mark. I like to keep mine on dim just because. You can choose whatever color scheme you want on your wavetable. I like mine on spectrum, just it gives you a better spectrum of light. Moving on to the track decks, I'm not going to change anything here. Basically, you could just change what shows up around the wavetable, what it says. I like the default setup as is, so I'm not going to change any of this. But feel free to tinker around and see what each of those does. Moving on to the remix decks, I don't really change any of this either because I don't use a remix deck. Um, so yeah, same deal. You can mess with those if you want, but I'm just going to leave them as the defaults. Moving on to the mixer, I'm going to choose the EQ type of classic just because I like that EQ type better. You have a choice of classic, P600, Nuo, and Zone. Um, yep, and you can change the crossfader sensitivity and the auto crossfader time. I like to keep mine closer to sharp if I were to use a MIDI controller because I'm a scratch DJ and a turntablist. But if you were, say, doing a house set or some like big room set, you should probably keep it to smooth because you want a smoother transition from one track to another. It's going to involve a lot of beat mixing, etc., etc. I like to set the auto gain when loading a track, and I like setting uh, the enable limiter because it keeps all possibility of a track overdriving uh, anything along whatever audio line you go through to a minimum. Next, you can see that you can check the EQ and fader, and basically that's going to let you see the highs, mids, and lows and the level of audio. I like to keep that checked even though I have an external mixer just to have an eye on what's happening in my computer internally. You can also choose to see the gain and filter, and also the crossfader if you're going to be using a MIDI controller. But I don't use those, so I'm just going to leave that unchecked. Moving on to the global settings, it's going to be a bar across the top. It's going to house the effects, the master clock, and the recorder. I like having the recorder available because I tend to record my mixes a lot. So I'm going to leave that set to recorder. You can also choose for an effect to be a single effect or a collection of three effects. Basically, that just gives you, one singular effect as opposed to three. Moving on to miscellaneous, you can switch to full screen on startup, which I like to do a lot. I just like to have my whole screen taken up by Traktor so I can get in the zone of the Traktor environment and see things better. Moving on to the effects, you can change each FX to ascend or insert. I like to keep mine on insert. You can also choose to have 4 FX units or 2 FX units. 4 FX units is going to give you a huge variety of options, compound effects on top of each other, etc., etc. And on top of that, Traktor gives you a really huge selection of effects, and it's really massive. It's awesome. It's awesome. Moving on to the mix recorder, you can choose internal or external. I choose external because once again I have an external mixer and things are going to be recorded through my audio, my external audio card, as opposed to internal recording, which would be the sound card in my actual PC. Um, Moving on, you can see that you can change the location and directory where your recording is going to be stored, and also the amount of space that each section of your recording is going to take up. Uncompressed audio tends to take up a very huge amount of space, especially if you have a long set. So basically what this is going to do is once your recording hits 650 megabytes or whatever you choose here, it's going to say, oh, chop it off and start a new file because it's getting too big. So moving on to browser details. I'm going to skip loop recorder and broadcasting mostly because it's pretty self-explanatory, and the broadcasting feature I don't really use that much. So anyway, moving on to browser details, it's going to let you customize the browser area of Traktor. I don't usually show the preview player just to make things more simple layout-wise. Um, yeah, but other than that, I keep things on the default. I like to have a bigger uh, row height, just so things look cleaner and not as bunched up. Moving on to the layout manager, this is where you can choose to customize your current layout. As you can see here, it says active on the left side, um, and the name and the type. So you can just click one of those and immediately changes to that new layout. So you can see it change to an advanced deck layout, track deck layout, and I've added some effects in there. But I'm going to keep mine on essential. Again, monkey with that if you want. I'm just going to keep mine on essential. Moving on to the file manager, it's going to let you do exactly what the name implies, and that's manage files. You can import music folders, determine time, etc., etc. BPM detection, you can customize this to whatever you want. Generally, I keep mine set on 78 to 155, mostly because that's what all the BPMs fall under for the tracks that I use. But you could do anything from a 60 to 200 BPM range, which is going to give you a very specific um, labeling, uh, or to a very small BPM range like 48 to 95, and that's going to give you like a double time type deal. Alright, moving on to the controller manager. This is where you would manage any sort of MIDI controller you would have, mapping it, custom mapping it. You can add a supported MIDI controller from Denon, Newmark, Pioneer, and Traktor. You can also create a generic MIDI TSI file where you can custom map anything that you connect, as well as the keyboard mapping. You can also import, where you would click import and locate the TSI file for your MIDI controller and hit open, and it would immediately recognize that. And other than that, guys, it looks like we've set up Traktor Scratch Pro. Alright, practice and enjoy.